Bonjour. In this grammar presentation, we're going to review registers to make sure that you can use the formal and informal registers appropriately. So, as a reminder, in sociolinguistics, a register is a variety of language marked by a specific choice of syntax, vocabulary, pronunciation, and is used according to a particular communicative and/or social context. The most common examples of registers are the formal and informal registers. So in English, an example of the formal register would be, "Good morning, sir, madam, how are you?" And an example of the informal register would be, "Hey, what up?" So make sure to memorize the level of formality of the phrases listed in the vocabulary list to avoid any faux pas. Remember that the difference between formal and informal is also marked by the difference between the honorific vous and the non-honorific tu second singular pronoun that is equivalent to you. Indeed, as you already know, tu and vos both mean you. Tu is used to address a familiar person and is named non-honorific in that sense. Vous is used to address two or more people, equivalent to y'all or you guys in English, or when you address a person to whom you want to show respect, and it's named honorific in that sense. So when do you use tu? You use tu with family and friends, children and teenagers, young people who are your age, people with whom you're not familiar, teachers and professors, superiors. When unsure about which one to use, the best is to use vous to avoid any faux pas. They will then let you know you can use tu with them, saying on peut se tutoyer. So repeat after me. On peut se tutoyer. One more time. On peut se tutoyer, which means we can use the tu form with each other. Note that tu has different forms. Tu, te, te, apostrophe, toi. So you will learn the differences later. Note the two ways of saying and you, et toi for the tu form, and et vous for the vous form. So this is a common mistake. You do not say et tu for and you. When you use the tu form, you say et toi. So repeat, et toi, et vous. Application. Determine if you should use tu or vous in the following context. You can now pause the video and do the application exercise. Context 1. You talk to a salesman. You use vous, okay? So salesman, you technically do not know them. Even if they're your age, there is some kind of distance, so use vous. Context 2. You talk to a teenager. You use tu. With children and teenagers, you can feel free to use tu. Context 3. You ask a 20-year-old for directions. You use tu. Actually, if you're about their age, it can be weird to them if you use the vous form. However, if you're older, here you can use vous. That is completely normal. So basically, the thing is like when you're young and you use vous with someone who's also young, it can be perceived as weird, especially in a non-formal context, like as in a store or something like this. Context 4, you talk to a friend. Here, you use tu, of course, you know them, you're familiar with them, so there's no issue. Context 5, you talk to a client. You use vous, okay? So even if they're your age, even if they're young, there is some kind of formality in a relationship with a client, so make sure to use vous. Context 6, you talk to a group of children. You use vous as well because you're talking to a group, okay? Again, vous means also y'all, you guys. It's used to address to a group. But if you talk to one child, then you use tu. Context 7, you talk to a professor. you use vous. Okay, so this is a higher level of formality. So you absolutely need to use vous. Context 8, you talk to your boss. You also use vous to show respect. Maybe your boss wants to have a closer relationship to you and can say you can use tu, but the default by far is to use vous. Context 9, you talk to your friends. You also use vous here because you're talking to a group of people. So if you talk to one friend, you use tu, but if you're talking to several friends, then you use vous, equivalent again to you guys or y'all. Context 10, you talk to a waitress. You use vous. Okay, so here we're also in a formal setting. Okay, even if they are your age, it's better to use vous by default. Exercice 1. Donnez l'équivalent formel ou informel. Okay, let's go over the phrases and repeat after me. Bonjour. Ciao. Comment vous appelez-vous? Ça va? Et vous? Je te présente Fatimata. So you can now pause the video and do the exercise either from memory or from using the vocabulary list on greetings and introductions. You can now pause the video and do the exercise. So the informal equivalent of bonjour will be salut. Repeat, salut. The formal equivalent of ciao would be au revoir. Repeat, au revoir. The informal equivalent of comment vous appelez-vous, so with the true form, will be comment tu t'appelles. Repeat, comment tu t'appelles, which means what's your name. The formal equivalent of ça va would be comment allez-vous. Repeat, comment allez-vous. And note the pronunciation of T here, which is the only case you pronounce the final T of comment. Okay, comment, which means how. So one more time, repeat, comment allez-vous? So which means how are you? Then the informal equivalent of et vous is je vous présente Fatimata. Repeat after me. Je vous présente Fatimata. So here you're going to use the vous form instead of the tu form, and it means I introduce you to Fatimata. Okay. So you're going to learn that later, but just be aware of it at the moment. So in French, you literally say I you introduce, okay? Or I to you introduce. So do not worry about that. You will see that later. Exercice 2. Décidez si vous utiliseriez tu ou vous. You can now pause the video and do the exercise. Context 1. You talk to your instructor. You need to use vous. Okay, remember with teachers, professor, you're expected to use vous. However, in an American environment, you might be able to use tu. Just double check with the instructor. Context 2, you talk to a classmate, you use tu. Okay, so generally your classmates are your age, it's considered maybe a more informal setting. Maybe if your classmate is a bit older, you want to show respect and you're going to use vous, but if your classmate is your age, you can feel free to use tu. Context 3, you order food in a restaurant. You use vous as well. Okay, so with waiter and waitresses, we're in a formal setting, so it's better to use vous. Note that sometimes if you're young, maybe some waiters and waitresses are going to use tu with you. It depends on the restaurant as well, like if it's a cafe or a bar. But yeah, by default, I recommend that you use vous. Context 4, you meet someone your age at a party. You use tu as well when see someone with your age, when you're in an informal setting, you can freely use tu. Context 5, you talk to your boss's child. You can use tu, okay? When you talk to a child, you can use tu without any hesitations. However, if you talk to your boss, you'd rather use vous. Context 6, you talk to a bank teller who is your age, you should use vous, okay? Again, you're at a bank, you're in a formal setting, so it's better to use vous. Context 7, you are at your family's doctor office. Same thing, formal setting, so it's better to use vous. Context 8, first time you meet your friend's mother. You should use vous, okay? Maybe the mothers is going to tell you on peut se tutoyer later on, and then you can use tu, but by default, you use vous. Context 9, the person says on peut se tutoyer. So this is a green light that you can use tu, okay? Repeat one more time just to make sure that you memorize this phrase. On peut se tutoyer. And finally, context 10, you are unsure if you should use vous, then use vous, okay? So to avoid any faux pas, to avoid offending people. Some people can be offended if you use tu with them because they can see that as a sign of disrespect. So if unsure, you use vous, okay? And maybe in some contexts, you're going to use vous and they're going to find this weird, so they can just smile. But it's better to use vous and let them say on peut se tutoyer than the opposite. And if you have questions, feel free to write them in the comment section. I'll be happy to answer them. Au revoir.